I'll tell you how it was. One day, my mother-in-law, Morag, spent the night at our house. She and my daughter Isla have a habit of chatting before bedtime. They get into bed and chirp under the covers for hours. After putting my son, Ewan, to bed and reading him a bedtime story in the nursery, I collapsed on the bed, unsuspecting. I was sure my wife Fiona was already under the covers. She reached for my nose as I flinched back from her, distracted by the visual of an imagined dog. Without turning on the light, I slipped my hands under the blanket and started stroking her, thinking it was Fiona. Suddenly the blanket moved, and Morag stood up, her eyes bulging with shock. She stared at me, clearly embarrassed, but after a while she started laughing. The situation was unbearably awkward. Eventually she went back to the nursery, where we put the cot next to Ewan's bed. I decided not to tell her about the incident, and she too remained silent, embarrassed. Morag, despite her age, retained the remnants of her former beauty. Unlike many women of age who stopped caring about their appearance, she retained her youthfulness. She still dyed her hair, had manicures, and dressed in a modern style. If she wore a skirt, it was always above her knees. She seemed to be hoping to meet another man, for everyone wants to feel alive and wanted. Her presence was magnetic in its own way, and it was impossible not to notice how she seemed to effortlessly draw attention to herself. After that incident, our interactions changed. I began to notice her lingering, attentive gazes, even invitations to do something. One day, as she was washing dishes in the kitchen, I came in for lunch. I tried to innocently walk past her, but the brief contact was charged. She turned around in surprise, and I laughed and sat down at the table as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry," I said, pretending to be sheepish. "I'm such a fool." She smiled weakly but said nothing, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something unspoken hung between us. Toward noon, I decided to mop the floor while Morag was around. She bent over to wring out a rag, and I couldn't help but notice her figure. Overcome with impulsive joy, I embraced her. She froze, apparently testing how far I would go. I gently placed my hands on her waist, and to my surprise she didn't pull away. Her skin was flawless and her body was well preserved, despite her years. Just as things started to escalate, Fiona walked into the kitchen to get a sandwich. "Why do you look so disheveled, Mum?" she asked, looking at both of us suspiciously. I lowered my head, pretending to concentrate on my plate. Morag, uncharacteristically flustered, mumbled something about cleaning, and avoided Fiona's gaze, said Fiona slightly abruptly in a way to relieve the agony. Morag and I avoided each other for a while, but the tension persisted. A few days later, we were alone together again. She was scrubbing the floor, and I approached her confidently. This time she turned and hugged me, which led to a lovely game for two adults. What followed was exciting and left us both very satisfied. Morag, experienced and unbridled, brought an intensity to the game that I hadn't expected. We separated afterwards, trying to recover before Fiona came home. She whispered to me as we parted, "This changes everything, doesn't it?" And I couldn't deny that it did. That night at dinner, Morag and I exchanged glances. I wondered if she would come to me again for a game of cards. Sure enough, around 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard the creaking of floorboards in the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, wearing a warm robe. We played silently, afraid to wake Fiona, and shared another good moment of our lives. Everything happened quietly, almost breathlessly, as if the mystery made it more exciting. The faint light in the hallway cast shadows that made everything seem even more interesting, and her movements graceful and deliberate. After a while, Lisa lifted her head to his door, turned, and waited patiently. In the morning, Fiona asked why there were 2 glasses of water in the kitchen. I feigned ignorance, resolving to be more circumspect from now on. Morag became more circumspect too, careful not to leave clues. Despite the risks, the charm of our clandestine meetings remained. We both realized that the stakes were high, but neither of us wanted to stop. The thrill of what we were doing seemed to outweigh the fear of being caught. Every moment felt like a gamble, but none of us could resist. In the weeks that followed, small, stolen moments became our new norm. A wave of the hand in the hallway, a shared smirk at the dinner table, or a lingering glance when no one was looking. These tiny interactions heightened the tension between us, making each encounter more intense than the last. It became a game, a dangerous dance of time and control. We had to be careful, for even the smallest slip-up could ruin everything. One evening, when Fiona was working late, Morag and I found ourselves alone again. We were sitting in the living room pretending to watch television, but the air between us was electrified. She leaned closer, her perfume intoxicating, and whispered something I couldn't make out, a feeling I had never felt before. By the time Fiona got home, everything was in perfect order. Morag sat quietly with a book, and I pretended to be absorbed in a soccer match. But the memory of what had just happened was fresh in my mind, and I couldn't resist glancing at her. She answered me with a barely perceptible smile, her confidence unwavering. The tangled web of our relationship grew tighter, each stolen glance and fleeting touch deepening the bond between us. Yet amidst the play and mystery, there was always a shadow of guilt. We realized we were doing it risky, but neither of us wanted to stop. We felt like we were walking on a tightrope, and each day the danger drew us closer to each other. Nanobots.